get started, I just wanted to say thank you all for coming to my channel for the first time or coming back to my channel. I appreciate you all and the support you've all given me over the years, so thank you, thank you, thank you. If you are not subscribed, please do so at this time. I would appreciate it so much. It would mean the world to me, and it helps the channel out incredibly. And if you like this type of whispered content, please hit the thumbs up button. And if you're so inclined, please leave a comment. And any requests, I try to do as many requests as I can. Let's just get into true and disturbing facts about true crime and killers. I know I say I don't do true crime, but these are just facts. The Golden State Killer, which we should all be familiar with. He committed at least 13 murders between 1974 and 1986. Truly, this serial killer era was known for breaking into victims' homes, undressing, then standing at the entrance of their victim's bedroom, scraping his long knife against the door frame until they woke up. He was also known for turning on the victim's TV. He would place a thick cloth over the screen and just use the glow from the TV as a light source while he tortured these poor people. When he was arrested eventually, the police noted that the computer in his bedroom also had a cloth draped over it. I guess they thought this suggested that this was done purposely so he could relive the murders, relive the murders. In the early 1920s, a German family and their new maid were brutally murdered at their farm. However, the family's patriarch had reported several strange incidents the months prior to the murders. These included footprints in the snow leading up to the farm and the attic, despite there being none leading away from the property. Keys went missing and a strange newspaper was found. In fact, the family's former housekeeper had left her job in the months leading up to the murders because she actually believed the house was haunted. Therefore, pinpointed that the killer was actually hiding in the attic for not 1 or 2 or 3, but 6 months before the murders. More than 100 suspects were interviewed in connection with the crimes, but the killer was never found. The Oakland County child killer murdered at least 4 children between 1976 and 1977. The parents of one of the abducted boys held a press conference in which they begged for their son to be returned. His mother directed part of the appeal to her son, saying she would feed him his favorite meal of KFC when he got home. Days later, the children, serial killer has never been found. Joe Metheny would gut his victims and then mix their flesh with animal meat to sell as barbecue burgers at his fast food restaurants stand on the side of the road. Now, he claims the only time he felt vaguely guilty was when children ate his sandwiches. But even then, Metheny justifies his actions by telling himself it was their parents' fault for being so stupid and allowing them to eat it. Robert Hansen. He killed 17 women over 12 years. He was known for kidnapping his victims before setting them loose in the Nid River Valley, where he would track them down and hunt them like animals, using a knife and a rifle. Issei Sakwa, a Japanese student studying for a PhD in France, killed and then ate part of his classmates' remains after being caught attempting to dump the rest of her body in a lake. Sagawa was eventually sent back to Japan. However, listen to this. He was never tried for the crime in his homeland and actually became a celebrity there. He appeared on talk shows, embarked on speaking tours, and wrote 18 books, worked as a food critic, and even starred in a soft-core B movie. Most chillingly of all, Sakwa admitted in 2013 that he still has the same desires to kill and devour other women. So how many women do you think he's eaten? Quote, I like elegant women, unquote, he said. Quote, I like the intelligence and beauty, and when I'm able to see all of that in one person, then I cannot help but wonder what she might taste like, unquote. Serial killer Robert Pickton fed some of the bodies of his 49 victims to pigs on his farm, or else put them through an industrial meat grinder, mixed it with pork, and sold it to meat processing businesses, family members, friends, and even the local police. The body of a pharmacology student, Annie Lee, was discovered in a cable chase inside the wall of a university basement laboratory 5 days after going missing, on the day she was due to be married. A university laboratory technician was charged and convicted of the crime, described by those that knew him as a quote-unquote clean freak. It is believed that he committed the murder after becoming angry with the conditions of Lee's lab. David Parker Ray, the toy box killer, abducted and drugged his victims. When they woke up, they were played recordings in which he described in detail the torture they'd experience over the next 30 days. Rodney Alcala, the dating game killer, won an episode of The Dating Game in 1978. Now this happened smack dab in the middle of his murdering spree. In 2012, the woman he wanted to date with so many years ago said they never actually met up because she felt he was too creepy when she met him backstage. Despite being one of the most prolific actually once worked at a suicide hotline and saved a 3-year-old child from drowning in a pool. Leonarda Cianciulli was an Italian woman who, in 1939, learned that her eldest and favorite son was to join the Italian army. She believed that the only way to ensure his safety was through human sacrifices. Over the course of a couple of months, she murdered 3 women from her neighborhood, all in the name of keeping her son safe. Afterwards, she would boil their bodies and turn them into tea cakes, and bars of soap, which she distributed to friends and neighbors. Albert Fish killed and ate a 10-year-old girl. He wrote a letter to her mother describing how sweet and tender her body was and how it had taken him 9 days to consume the entire corpse. The most prolific serial killer in South Carolina drove around in a hearse with a bumper sticker that read, "I haunted people." He told people that he needed it to take the bodies of people he killed to his private cemetery. He claimed to have killed between 100 and 110 people. When police eventually came to the house of Ed Gain, they found an absolute pigsty. Gain had been living alone since the death of his brother in a barn fire. It's speculated that, Gain may have killed his brother. He had let much of the house go into absolute disrepair. They found countless body parts from his various grave-digging excursions, including a bag of wilted vaginas and, of course, the infamous skin lampshade and half-finished woman's suit made out of human skin. There were maggots living in old dishes in the kitchen. It was the type of disorganized mess that you would expect from a man who spent his nights completely disconnected from reality, all except one room. His mother's upstairs room remained absolutely pristine, except for dust he had collected and seemingly untouched from the time of her death. Many years earlier, when she died, he had such a fear or respect for his mother that he was afraid to set foot in her room long after she died. He claimed to hear her voice criticizing him every once in a while. This was the central experience that inspired Norman Bates' character to maintain his mother's home image in Psycho. It does. I knew that it was going to say that because it sounds just like Psycho. So here's a fun fact about Gain. In Taxi Driver, Travis Bickle makes an offhand comment when leaving a diner that he had a cup of coffee and a slice of apple pie with cheese on top. In exchange for details to investigators after his capture, Gain requested the same meal. John Wayne Gacy. Well, let's just say there were so many bodies crammed underneath the house that the bodies melted together and the bones had to be sorted for more than 2 years to put together the full skeletons. So the bones were actually fused together. The Hillside Stranglers picked up a young woman to murder. They then discovered that her father was Peter Lorre, a legendary Hollywood character. towards the end, just before he got caught, there were so many bodies in his apartment. He ran out of room and stored a victim in his bathtub. He proceeded to shower over him every day for a month. Can you imagine the smell? Straddling over a rotten corpse to get fresh and clean for the day. That is completely just beyond my comprehension. Durango Vargas killed and ate at least 10 people, but he only ate men because he said their meat tasted better than women. He also would not eat fat people because he thought they contained too much cholesterol. In the 70s, there was a serial killer who was known for R-wording and killing women. He went on a dating show, and the woman ended up choosing him, but luckily canceled the date. That was somebody I just talked about. But you can actually find the video on YouTube. It is really creepy. It's very creepy. John Norman Collins used to pick up women on his motorcycle. The bodies of his women victims used to be dumped here and there, but they were always washed. Turns out he only killed women who were on their period. Also, he is referred to as John Norman Collins during his trial. He later changed his name to Chapman because there was a lawyer in town whose name was John Collins. This way, he was able to distinguish the difference between the two of them. I never knew this. Did you know that Jeffrey Dahmer did not eat people with tattoos because he said the ink made the flesh taste weird? Well, I never thought about getting a tattoo, but I don't know, maybe having one wouldn't be so bad. The entire police report on the Green River Killer is absolutely insane. About 7 years back, I watched this ID show on him, and I was alone. My parents had taken my daughter, and I literally could not sleep. I was scared to death. But there are fascinating reports about his attempts to cover his tracks by buying new car tires, destroying shoes, and getting new ones right after the murders. Now, to avoid leaving traceable tracks behind, now remember the Green River Killer did not get caught for a very, very long time. Another thing that was fascinating is that he took the jewelry off his victims and left it in the ladies' restroom at his workplace. He got off on seeing the found jewelry on various women around the office. Albert Fish is a sick mother effer. He would stick needles into his penis when he masturbated, sticking them so deep sometimes they would get stuck. He actually told this to police. They did not believe him until they saw the X-ray. I am surprised we do not actually hear more about Robert Hansen in popular culture. See, because he would kidnap women and turn them loose in the Alaskan wilderness like we were talking about before. And he hunted them and killed them like cannibals. He didn't have the highest number of victims, but his method of hunting was truly the most insane and vicious. The BTK killer installed alarms at several people's houses because they feared has a 1 in a million genetic condition in which his blood type does not match the blood type found in his semen. How odd and lucky for him, and how horrible for the victims. David Berkowitz, the son of Sam Killer, has been eligible for parole since 2002. He consistently either asks not to be released from prison or just skips parole hearings altogether. When asked how he's changed in 2016, he responded by saying that, quote, "I am no risk whatsoever," unquote. He also has been called a model prisoner by prison staff and has even graduated with honors from Sullivan Community College. He also counseled fellow prisoners and even changed his nickname to the Son of Hope after converting to evangelical Christianity in 1987. So, one of the most interesting cases around pertaining to a serial killer and their life, like he doesn't want to be released because he wants, basically what they're saying is that he wants to make a difference. He wants to continue his life in prison, to counsel others, and to be a better voice. Not that that makes him forgives his crimes in any way, I'm not saying that. But if a serial killer could do something that was selfless and start to rectify what he has done, I guess that would be one of the ways to start doing so. I don't know, what do you think? So Ed Kemper has an extremely high IQ, such an intelligent sociopath that in the end he wanted to be caught because he knew that what he was doing was morally wrong despite his lack of ability to feel empathy. Now he spent some of his time in prison helping state psychologists learn how to understand psychotic inmates better, particularly by helping them form questionnaires that would be more telling. So, serial killer or killer profiling. So, Ted Bundy was actively involved in politics. There was talk that he may one day become, listen to this, the governor of Washington, and he messed that all up now, didn't he? He confessed to his lawyer that he killed over 100 people, far more than the 30 or so he was charged with. I have a question for you. Do you think that serial killers actually have a higher number or lower number? Because a lot of times you'll hear them say to somebody of confidence or confidant that they have killed, say, 50 or 60 more people than they were ever charged with. Which do you think is true? Do you think they're just posting, or do you think that that's the more honest number? I'm curious. I don't really know what I think. It's hard to tell because so many are such liars. Ed Gein's desire to become his mother also inspired Norman Bates, the novel Psycho, which we were talking about earlier. Later became the Alfred Hitchcock film. I mean, so what I guess I didn't know about Ed Gein's is that he had a house full of skinheads desire to become a woman. Also inspired Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs. I didn't know he was an inspiration for so many movies and just absolute horrors. Now you don't hear about Joel Rifkin very often, and I'm not sure why. Joel Rifkin drove around casually with a decomposing corpse in his pickup truck. He was stopped due to a missing license plate, and he remarked about how it's always the 25-cent part of that gets you, or something to that effect. Basically, the stupidest, smallest, most innocuous part of what they're doing is what gets them caught, probably because it's not something they're thinking about, they think they're so smart, but in reality, I did hear this, that serial killers are actually not as smart as we had originally thought. It had been thought for many years that serial killers had a very high IQ, but that is not the case. They're average to below average in most cases. Now, some are very smart, but in general, the majority, they are average or below average. Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, was actually interviewed nine times during the investigation, but the police discounted him each time because he had the wrong accent. Some hoax had sent a number of letters and recording claiming to be the Ripper. The police were looking for a guy with a Jodi or Newcastle accent rather than the Sutcliffe's Yorkshire accent. The hoax is believed to have cost, I can't imagine it cost so much money. 3 more women and their lives. So not only did it cost a lot of money, but it also cost three more women's lives. It was only when he confessed to the murders in 1981 that Sutcliffe was finally caught, and the recording was proven fake. Now, the person who played the hoax on the police department was named John Humble, sentenced to 8 years in prison in 2006 for doing such a heinous act. Now, I think he should have been sentenced just as a murderer because of his hoax. He killed 3 more women, even though he physically didn't kill them, because of his silly shenanigans. 3 more women died. Ed Kemper picked up a girl. She was around 14. He told her that he was going to kill her then himself, but told her he was just going to take her home and kill himself. He had a thing for wanting his victims to know he was about to kill them until the last moment. When he got out of the car to get something from the truck, he ended up locking himself out of the car with the girl still inside. Now, she could have driven away, but she let him back inside, and he proceeded to kill her. This proves in so many sick ways how manipulative this man was. I mean, she could have run. She could have taken his car and driven away. you want to be there to tell them, go, he's gonna kill you, go. Dean Coral, also known as the Candyman, was a serial killer who had 2 teenage accomplices. He repeatedly paid them to lure other teenage boys to his house for him to kill. The really interesting part is how it all ended up going down. His one accomplice, Elmer Wayne Henley Jr., was out looking for victims one night when he instead ran into a female friend whose father had been abusing her. Henley ended up taking her and a male friend to Coral's house in order to escape the abuse. As expected, Coral wasn't too excited about a girl being brought to his house because he usually exclusively killed boys. So Henley and his 2 friends wake up tied up. Coral says that he's going to kill them all, but Henley manages to talk his way into getting untied so he can help Coral kill the others instead. Before anything happens, Henley grabs Coral's gun and pretty much refuses to harm the girl, saying that Coral's gone too far this time. Coral starts goading Henley, saying that he wouldn't shoot him. Henley then turns the gun on Coral and shoots him. Now he ends up untying the other 2 teens, who ended up telling Henley to call the police. During the call, Henley admits to shooting Coral, and he goes on to confess to everything when the investigation into Coral and the shooting begins. Now, the strangest, oddest, craziest part of this story is what Henley said to his male friend while waiting for the police to show up. If you were not my friend, I could have gotten $200 for you. So this man would pay these teenage boys $200 for each kid that they brought him to kill. That's beyond bizarre. Joseph Mengele, the angel of death, was awarded for bravery when he jumped into a burning tank to pull out a wounded soldier. I always found that interesting, how you could risk your life to save someone and then spend the rest of it torturing and slaughtering people. Yeah, like, how could somebody have their brain split like that? They would jump into a fire and risk their own life to save somebody, but then turn around and hurt so many others. The Brazilian serial killer Little Beatty murdered over 40 people in prison. He began by murdering the gang that killed his girlfriend, stabbing his father, who was in prison for killing his mother during a visit. He was well liked because he was considered a sort of vigilante avenger, despite killing indiscriminately within prison. No difference between drug possession and murder. Because of Brazil's odd sentencing laws, he could only serve a maximum of 30 years, and is now currently a YouTuber and ranch hand or something of that sort. Now, how about back to the BTK killer? I'd have to say this is the most self-righteous, self-serving, pompous ass I know of all serial killers. Even in prison, just to see how long it would take for someone to investigate. He would order sandwiches from the place and sit on the drum while he ate. He also made a weird clicking noise with his mouth when he was angry. If you heard that, you're as good as dead. As dead. So, I did not know this about Ted Bundy. Apparently, he helped in the investigation of the Green River Killer. He made a psych profile which ended up being close to the actual Green River Killer than the FBI's own psych profile. The Green River Killer had really evaded the police for 30 plus years. I never thought he would ever get caught. It is said that when I was watching that ID show, when asked about his early killings, about children, he gets angry and he won't talk about them. It's scary. I don't know. He is the scariest one to me. I don't know why. Just completely frightens me. So the help of Ted Bundy actually was a huge part of the profiling of the Green River Killer. He helped catch him. So Bundy also tried to masturbate to photos of his crime scene when Detective Keppel brought them in, which is why he stopped letting Bundy keep the files. Mary Bell. She killed her first victim around age 10, the second a few months later. She left notes about the killing and visited the mothers of the boys she killed. She asked the mother if she could see the body of her son, if they were sad that their sons were dead. Did you know she was released at 23 after only 12 years? And her daughter and her granddaughter all have been granted anonymity for the rest of their lives. I guess because she was so young when she did it. About Dr. Harold Shipman. He lost his mother watching how morphine eased her pain before she passed. Then he became a doctor, using morphine overdoses to kill people, especially rich old ladies, and wrote himself into their wills with forgery. Eventually, of course, he was caught because it was suspicious that every single one of his patients had him in their will, and they all died under his care. But he did inherit a number of estates and a lot of money before getting caught. Now, Dr. Harold Shipman, I don't think was so much a serial killer other than the amount of people he killed. I think he was just a greedy bastard that knew that he wasn't hurting his victims. They were old, they would go to sleep, and he would get their money. I don't know what that's classified under, but it doesn't have the same desire to kill. The only reason he killed them was for their money. Most serial killers kill because they have to kill for themselves. They don't steal anything. They don't usually, they don't really want anything from anybody because that's really silly. He should have known he was going to get caught. Maybe one or two, but single old lady that had money had written him into the will before they died. That's just too obvious. So Edmund Kemper, he was also known as the co-ed killer, committed a series of murders and rapes in California before finally killing his abusive mother. At which point he drove to Arizona, called the police and confessed to everything, waited for the police to pick him up at the payphone he was at. He provided intimate details of the case before he could get representation, so there was no way to get out of being found guilty for his crimes. Now, during the court hearings, a lawyer asked him what he felt was a just punishment for what he had done. He thought about it and replied, "Death by torture." To this day, he declines to attend parole hearings and has repeatedly asserted that people like him do not belong in society. So Dennis Rader was the BTK killer. I remember this. Did you know he once put a victim's children in the bathroom with toys while he tied up their mother and killed her? I guess shortly after making his way into the house, the BTK killer locked Shirley Van Relford's 3 children, ages 5, 4, and 8, in the bathroom with blankets and toys. He tied the 26-year-old mother of 3 to the bed in a complicated bondage position. Rader then killed the young woman by putting a plastic bag over her head and suffocating her, tying a ligature around her neck. Her young children cried and screamed repeatedly, trying to escape from the bathroom to help their crying mother. By the time one of the Relford's children managed to force the bathroom door open, the 26-year-old woman was dead, and her killer had left the scene. I'm thankful he didn't kill her children, but my God, leaving those 3 children without a mother. So I have never heard, I don't think, of this man. Mark Brandon Reed, also known as the Chopper, was a renowned killer in Australia. However, he only targeted drug dealers and people who made attempts on his life. When he got old, he was told he had liver cancer and had only a few weeks until his death. He was asked by the television show 60 Minutes Australia if he wanted one last interview before he died. This man said yes. When asked about all the murders, which he previously claimed as self-defense, not him or he covered them up, he just confessed to all of them, claiming they were never self-defense and he had committed the ones he previously denied. He passed away a few weeks later, went out listing everyone he killed. The shock that was left behind with the community of Australia was immense. I've never heard of him, but I may look him up. So how about the infamous Zodiac killer? So the number 1 suspect's name was Arthur Lee Allen. A lot of circumstantial evidence suggested he was the killer, enough for him to be certainly the Zodiac. one sick day off work a day after one of the suspected murders happened. His mother gave him a zodiac watch for Christmas, which had the same symbol on it. He was incredibly smart and had knowledge about fingerprints, DNA, and may have planted false evidence. Did you know he spoke with his friend before the Zodiac murders, Don Cheney, about writing a novel? This novel would be about a man named Zodiac. The Zodiac killed couples at random with a gun and a torch attached to it, and taunted the police with letters, symbols, and odd, meaningless puzzles. He told the police he was going to Lake Berryessa on the day one of the murders happened, but went to the coast instead. Now he also admitted to having bloody knives in his car on the day of that murder, which he claimed he killed a chicken. The boot print left at one of the crime scene had the same size shoe as Allen and was a Wing Walker military boot. Allen had been in the Navy years before, was supposedly able to write with his left and print with his right, in which the zodiac letters are written in. So his handwriting matches that of the zodiac. A surviving victim picked his face out of a lineup in 1991. But don't worry, the evidence gets a lot more bizarre. In 1974, this man was arrested for child SA and released in 77. There were no zodiac letters sent during this period. Kind of strange, isn't it? He was a school teacher, fired in 1968 because he essayed some of his students. In one of the letters, he threatened to kill school children. I wanted to be a bouncer at his friend Ralph Spinell's nightclub, but he wouldn't let him. He told him that he will go to San Francisco to kill a cabbie. That night, Paul Stein, a cab driver, was shot point blank in the head. Now, many search warrants were made against Allen in the early 1990s. The search conducted found bombs, formulas for bombs which are identical to the ones found in the Zodiac's letters. An unidentified man named Lee was known to associate with one of the victims, and Allen always went by his middle name, which was Lee. Now he died in August 1992, a month before he was meant to meet up with investigators about the case. How convenient was that, right? So here's the actual evidence against them. If you didn't find the circumstantial evidence pretty damning. He was overweight, and a witness says Allen was not the man they saw on the night. So this is the evidence against him being the Zodiac killer, by the way. I'm sorry, I did not preface that well. He was overweight, and a witness says Allen was not the man they saw on the night of the Paul Stein murder. Fingerprints did not match, and a palm print found on a letter did not match. DNA did not match on a stamp licked. Allen had a habit of forgetting other people to lick his stamps because the glue made him sick. was ever arrested for the Zodiac case. David Parker Ray. Many victims did survive this killer, the toy box killer, but unfortunately they did not recall what had happened. He would kidnap victims, use them as SA slaves for a few months, drug them, clean them thoroughly before dropping them off unconscious at the site or the side of the road, hundreds of miles from where he picked them up. Only some women picked up by him were killed. Still more than enough to be classified as a serial killer, though. It takes 3 people, I'm pretty sure, to become a serial killer, and 5 to be a mass murderer. I'm pretty sure. Don't hold me to that one. Now, it was claimed that Jeffrey Dahmer was neglected by his parents in childhood. Said that he had not even seen his mother for 10 years prior to incarceration. At sentencing, his father and stepmother asked for 10 minutes to say goodbye and hug. His father often visited him in prison, and he had weekly phone calls with his mother. Despite the heinous crimes, they seemed to have some kind of unconditional love for this man. It made all the stories about their estrangement really hard to believe. Now, I told you probably 4 or 5 times, that I actually grew up next to his grandmother's house in Bath, Ohio. And what I heard was completely different, that his parents were there. His grandmother would take him to church. He enjoyed going to church, and even when he came back, he actually moved back to Bath when he got older because he was afraid that he might kill again, and he didn't want to. So he moved back with his grandmother and started going to church. I don't really know what to believe. It's hard to say, unless you were there. All I know is my aunt said that Jeffrey Dahmer she went to high school with him, and they had a few classes together, and she said he always stayed in the back of the room. Always stayed in the back. So, that was Jeffrey Dahmer. Just little tidbits of each serial killer as we go, as I find some interesting facts. And some serial killers I have never heard of. I don't know. There is a serial killer that would only go into the front door if the front door was unlocked, because otherwise he didn't feel welcome. Do you remember hearing about the Gainesville Ripper and how he would go from door to door, and how he would pick his victims was basically that, or one of his victims, I know for sure, that was because the screen doors happened to be open and she was lying there on the couch. California highways you may have driven over many, many times, especially if you live in California. Journalist Vlado Daneski was caught when he reported his own crimes. Now, that's one thing to report your own crimes as a journalist. However, it's another thing to include information that had not been released to the public, and only the killer himself could possibly know. Bila Kiss was a serial killer who would pickle people in barrels stored in his basement. Now, someone figured it out that they couldn't get him because he was fighting in World War I. By the time they dragged him down, he had disappeared, left a dead guy in his hospital bed. Supposedly, he joined the French Foreign Legion and deserted them as well. I think a lot of times history will lose track of people like that, especially during that time, they just kind of are all over the place, all over the world, and it's so hard to keep up with them when they change their names, change their regime, speak a different language. I mean, that would be really strange or hard to find somebody like that. I've never heard of Belagus. Has anybody? I'm just curious. So, now Pedro. Now this is a crazy one. I did a whole true crime on this man, but Pedro Lopez pled guilty to the murders of 100+ girls and only received a maximum sentence of 16 years. That was the maximum possible sentence in Ecuador. He was released despite promising to continue killing, and then he disappears afterwards. So he could easily still be out there killing people. I didn't know that Ed Gein only killed 2 people. Is that right? I'm gonna have to look that fact up because he is so popular. Interesting. I mean, I thought you had to kill 3 or more, but that's news to me. Straight facts of serial killers. Since the 1980s, there are still 220,000, almost 250,000 unsolved serial killer murders in the United States. A serial killer has 4 types: mission-oriented, visionary, control-oriented, and hedonistic. You can walk past at least 36 serial killers in your lifetime. Serial killer killings in California are one of the highest numbers in the U.S. at 1,682. 70% of all known serial killer murders come from America. Police cannot find a genetic profile for a serial killer as they differ in so many ways. A serial killer is not specified in a demographic group like religion, race, age, or sex. Most serial killers do not dress strangely or act any differently than normal people. Research shows that most of the serial killers arrested are those with homes, families, most of which are also normal members of their neighborhood communities. There are many motivations for a serial killer, including anger, financial gain, attention seeking, and even just the thrill. Research reveals that a serial killer thinks that he or she can get away with murder. Well, apparently, they're right if 250,000 have never been solved. Studies show that once a serial killer has their first to kill, the innate desire to murder will never stop. Never stop. A serial killer has a common diagnosis of either delusional disorder, schizophrenia, or major depression. Regardless of what their motives are, a serial killer will kill because it gives them the satisfaction to do so. That's truly terrifying. According to research, America has seven of the most notorious serial killers ever. A common misconception about serial killers is that they are usually social misfits. A serial killer will most likely murder within their area. It is very rare for them to leave their comfort zone, however. Keys. Remember Mr. Keys? Yeah, well, Israel Keys, yes, that was his first name. He taught us that a serial killer can feel comfortable all over the United States by leaving kill kits. Next to California, Texas follows with the highest number of serial killer murders with at least 893. So that's terrifying. Terrifying. About different ways that murderers can murder, such as a poison-tipped umbrella. September 7th, 1978, Mr. Georgy Markov was murdered with a poison-tipped umbrella. It was found that the umbrella concealed a tiny, tiny hollow needle that injected a deadly pellet filled with ricin, a highly toxic substance. By the time he reached the hospital, it was too late, and he died 3 days later. Catherine Knight Horror. John Price was a man from New South Wales, Australia. He met a gruesome end at the hands of his partner, Catherine Knight, in the year 2000. So what makes this so different from any other murder? Well, it was the brutality of the murder. Knight did not just end Price's life, she went to unimaginable lengths to make sure he suffered. She stabbed him repeatedly, skinned him, and even attempted to cook his body parts. it is what nightmares are truly, truly made of. But what would motivate somebody to kill somebody in such a manner? Well, it is said that Knight was deeply obsessed with Bryce, and their tumultuous relationship was marred by violence and abuse. Her actions not only shocked the local community but sent shockwaves through the entire world. Young Jewel, often referred to as the Raincoat Killer. Now this horrific South Korean murderer sent craziness throughout the nation in the early 2000s with his gruesome killing spree. So Yu's notoriety does not just stem from the fact that he took multiple lives, but the horrific and bizarre, horrifying method he used. Now this man, a very disturbed individual, he targeted wealthy and elderly victims. He lured them with the promise of financial gain. But what made his style of murder truly horrific? Well, he liked to dismember his victims. Yo often hacked his victims into pieces. And he didn't stop just one or two. His body count surpassed 20 confirmed victims. Now, he just didn't use dismemberment as a murder method. He poisoned, bludgeoned, and strangled his victims, creating a nightmarish pattern of death that confused and stumped law enforcement for many years. So he did end up being captured. And when he did, it was in 2004, and it ended his reign of terror. And my regards to the families, because that is just terrible. How about Dennis Nielsen? So he was a British serial killer known for his horrible murder methods. He was known as Muswell Hill Murderer and the Kindly Killer. He operated in London during the late 70s and early 1980s. So 1970s and early 1980s. But what set his murder methods apart from other killers? He would strangle and drown as his preferred murder techniques. He would often lure young men to his home with the promise of company, food, alcohol. Once they were there, he would strangle or drown them, sometimes rendering them unconscious, so not totally killing them. Unnoticed for several years because he would dispose of the bodies by dismembering them and flushing the remains down the toilet or burning them in his garden. He was friendly, appeared to be normal. Nobody suspected this man, which makes him even that much more petrifying. He finally confessed to killing 15 young men. But like many serial killers, the true number is suspected to be much higher. This is so sad. Diane Downs, I'll never forget this murder. 1983, shot her own kids. She claims they were victims of carjacking on a remote Oregon road. But her story started falling apart like a house of cards. Her behavior super suspicious, and the authorities started digging deeper. One of her children sadly didn't make it. The other two survived, but with some serious injuries. The motive behind this gruesome act, you will never guess. She was involved with a man that didn't want kids. He didn't want to get into a relationship with a woman who had a bunch of children, so she thought her children were holding her back from happiness. In 1984, she was convicted of murder and sentenced to life. So Richard Crafts made headlines in the 80s when he used a wood chipper to dispose of his wife's, Ellie Crafts' body. Unfortunately, his wife's body was never fully recovered. Luckily, there were still bone fragments left, enough to convict Kraft for the killing. This was the first case in Connecticut that tried and convicted a person without a body. So the acid bath murder. Now this is another horrific murder technique. George Higgs' acid bath murders certainly claim a sinister spot. The British serial killer, active in the 40s, managed to dissolve his victims' bodies in barrels of acid, sulfuric acid, leaving not a single trace behind. He was a smooth talker, using his charm to get close to people before dispatching them. He believed that by dissolving the bodies he could avoid detection. His meticulous planning and the sheer audacity of using acid to dispose of human remains make Higgs' crimes a truly, truly horrific and uncomfortable chapter in criminal history. However, in the end, it was his cockiness and an arrogant confession that led to his capture, and he paid for his horrifying acts with his own life, hanged for his heinous crimes in 1949. That is truly disturbing and sick. That is the disturbing and bizarre facts about serial killers and the serial killers